through the highways, and on we'll go.
Hi everyone, welcome to Sports Stories SS15. This is Lucas here with another guest, PhD student, university lecturer, and CrossFit athlete, Vicky Myers. Hi Vicky, how are you?
I'm good, thanks. Happy about the introduction, being a CrossFit athlete.
Of course, you are. Thank you for coming on firstly. And if you could just start off by telling everyone about yourself so the people know and how you ended up where you are now.
Yeah, I think it's really important to kind of look at people's like journeys and sporting journeys to kind of help shape kind of who they are, like characteristics they have. So it's quite an interesting question, really. But for me, you know, my sort of journey was my sporting career was from a really young age, because I took part in gymnastics since I was like 6 years old. So it's one of those sports which you have to be really young to kind of start, and it's the age is getting a little bit later now, but earlier on, you know, you're kind of starting from around 6, 7 years old, learning quite complicated movements and, you know, quite dangerous kind of movements as well. So yeah, like started with that, and then I finished my career at 14, just due to like a height, because I was quite tall compared to other people, and it kind of didn't allow me to continue the sport on, unfortunately. But I was like it would be classed as like an elite standard, so that kind of was, you know, taught me a lot about dedication and commitment, although you don't really realize that at a young age. It's kind of helped shape me kind of now, and then and then at kind of like university, you know, kind of college, university, kind of went through to more the athletics side and hockey, kind of whilst I was doing my masters, and did a bit of Olympic weightlifting as well. So kind of switched from like an individual sport to more like hockey based and team sports, which was really interesting. Yeah, like yourself, you know, like just playing a team sport is completely different in terms of like pressure. But also the fun and the social side, and so that helped shape as well, so that was pretty good. And then the last sort of 3 to 4 years, it took me a while to be converted to a CrossFitter, but I mean, I'm sure lots of CrossFit athletes will say the same thing. It takes a while, so you can kind of dip in, and because I had a background in gymnastics and weightlifting, it really helped prepare me for CrossFit, and the kind of the aspects that it's, you know, the benefits that it sells, and how good the, you know, I guess the social is, but also you with the like-minded people, similar sort of backgrounds perhaps, but it's also just at different you know, different levels and abilities. So yeah, CrossFit for me for the last 3 years has been kind of well, more competitively, trying to get more competitively in competing in teams. However, now I'm kind of doing CrossFit at the moment, but I am going to be going on maternity leave soon, so I am expecting a baby. So yeah, it's thank you very much. So it's kind of like navigating CrossFit and still being able to train 6 days a week, but the affiliation, they kind of have got some resources out there that you can follow, so it's quite good for other women in that position, or who are exercising. You can still follow the somewhat similar programs, so it's quite good for women, for women in general, where there is quite a lack of knowledge and lack of research around participating in sports and exercise when you're pregnant. So that's been a huge thing for me over the past sort of few months of trying to navigate through that. But yeah, so that's kind of like my sporting stuff, sporting side of me. The other stuff I'd say, like working side, obviously you said I'm a lecturer at Leeds Beckett University. I also am a chair of the Classification Advisory Group, which is part of International Rugby League. And then I'm on the board for the Rugby Football League. And with the kind of the classification side and looking at the PDRL, which is Physical Disability Rugby League, and obviously it's part of the World Cup this year in October, so that's brilliant. And working on, you know, with other people, other, you know, very professional and knowledgeable people from different sports, such as like golf and athletics. We've kind of created a good classification system for this new PDRL kind of World Cup that's going to be going ahead. So yeah, I've had quite a lot of experiences in multiple sports now, I'd say. You know, post kind of masters, coming up to kind of finishing PhD, I've had a lot of things going on, and it's been great just to learn about different sports, different people,
Definitely.
and different disciplines really. So apart from that, kind of really the only other things I would say during university was like a bit of coaching as well. So I've done some coaching at hockey camps in America and things like that. So
So you've done
it's
a
a
bit of
bit,
everything really. And
yeah,
you've
I
touched
think
on coaching, you touched on playing, teaching, everything.
it's really just, I think you get opportunities. Sometimes you just
Definitely.
got to take them, even if you're not, I mean, I didn't know a great deal about rugby league before I even came to Leeds, you know, so it's something that you just got to take and run with, and in the end it kind of pays off for you, and you get kind of really involved in other things really, and they, as I say, it kind of teaches you.
Kind of take it in your stride and keep going with it
Yeah,
rather than stopping
yeah,
at
yeah,
certain points. So just quickly on the CrossFit. So what was it that made you initially get into CrossFit? Like, because it's not a very big sport, and
yeah.
so what was it that
No,
made you go for it?
so it was other friends. So the friends did the sport, and they were like, you'd be really good at it because your gymnastics and your weightlifting background. And
Okay.
I was like, oh, I'm not so sure. I feel like it's a bit of a cult. You know,
Yeah.
I'm not so sure, and it seems really difficult.
Yeah.
Not sure if I'm got the time or energy to invest in a sport like that.
Mm.
So it was literally through direct, you know, just friends who,
Word of
and
mouth type
and
of thing.
and yeah, and if I went on holiday, like there'd be CrossFit gym boxes like all over like Europe and America and everywhere. So I started to do it, just dropping into those kind of every now and again.
Mm.
And then I just committed to one gym, um, form Leeds in the city centre, and just kind of haven't looked back since that really. Yeah, so that's me for CrossFit, and the once you start it, it's very very addictive. So
It
yeah.
is a great it's a great sport because it kind of involves everything. Like you do a bit of running, do you do swimming in CrossFit or
Yeah,
yeah,
there's like, well, there's all sorts of, yeah, paddleboarding, kind of the swimming, yeah, running. There's obviously all the erg machines. So you got quite a lot of rowing, and but also like some of the areas of like like weightlifting, like
yeah,
snatch and clean and jerks. But you know, you've got to be a good start when you're getting like to higher up standards. You know, you've got to have good technique.
yeah,
I think there's a lot in the sport. There's a lot of criticism around technique, so it's about making sure the sport, you know, is accountable for making people better at, you know,
yeah.
at the sport as well. But also, yeah, there's such a big amount, you know, there's rope climbs, there's gymnastics, there's like toast bar muscle ups, you know, there's like burpees and box jumps and everything else kind of in
Everything
between.
training.
So yeah,
And yeah, and like it's like I said, it's a great one. It's up and coming because obviously there's the CrossFit Games that I've seen, and I'm sure a lot of people have
yeah.
seen. So
Yeah,
it's
there's
a
one
good
main
sport to get
games in
into.
America, yeah, in Madison, and it's every year. They've also started releasing some documentaries, all right, Miles to Madison, which
Mm,
promotes the games, which they only did that, I think started that last year. So there's been quite a lot more hype around CrossFit recently, the past year or two.
definitely.
And there's some, yeah, better promotion of athletes and stories of, I think stories is important, isn't it, when you're trying to sell a sport, is
Yeah,
um but also how they use everything through like YouTube as well has really helped develop their platform, mainly using like Facebook and YouTube originally to kind of pick the sport up. And then obviously the prize money has become bigger and greater now, so there's more interest from that side of it, and it's becoming more of a professionalized sport where athletes can now kind of give their jobs up and work and compete at different, you know, various different events across the year, and they can make enough money for it. I think
yeah,
that was always
definitely.
part of it. But also there's, you know, kind of linking in my disability sport stuff, is that there's an adaptive part and an adaptive division as well.
Very inclusive.
It's quite an inclusive sport, yeah, I would say. And and the spectatorship for that is actually probably quite a bit higher than other sports with disability. You know, perhaps such as golf, or tennis. Tennis is a little bit better, obviously
Yeah,
now, more professionalized. But in terms of actual participation, I know quite a few people locally who compete who are classed in it. They call it the adaptive division.
right.
It could be things like, you know, MS, or it can be a limb deficiency, or you know,
But everyone can get involved is the key thing, really.
yeah,
Yeah.
yeah, absolutely. And it doesn't matter
Um,
what age you are as well, because there's quite a lot of masters athletes as well, even into like the 60s 70s kind of age bracket,
really.
which is, yeah, it's not really, I mean, there's masters golf, isn't there, and things like that, but it's one of the sports I think that actually considers other categories, older categories, so it's not as ageist, I guess.
So is there like a setup? Do you get people like young children doing CrossFit or not so much?
Yeah, they've only just started that past year or so of CrossFit Kids. Kind of in the UK, I can only apply. Obviously, I can't talk about other countries, and my experiences, of course, locally. But yeah, there are CrossFit Kids classes now that start, and we're noticing in the games, well, the athletes are a lot younger that are able to qualify for the games. So we've got some really strong up and coming athletes that are like kind of 16 to 18, and you're noticing them a lot more, but rather than like years ago it would be only kind of adults. So, and they're focusing a lot more on the kind of the player development, or the kind of player development pathway, aren't they, really, in their sport, and trying to get more youngsters. But I think it's a fine line between how much you put in with younger athletes, because it is such an intense sport. It's also about a longevity plan, isn't it, of not getting injuries, same with any sport, but not getting injuries and trying to prevent those, and also trying to manage that intensity of training
things
for
like
a young person.
the weightlifting and stuff, I guess, is a bit more, you have to be a bit more careful with younger people.
And it's all relative to age and ability, so
definitely.
I think it's one of the sports where it's good to, obviously, of course, to start when you're young, but also they would encourage you to do various things like gymnastics and weightlifting as separate as well, to build up that strength as you progress. So whereas other sports, they might catch you in and just keep you in that kind of player pathway, I think it's also important for CrossFit. People who want to do well in CrossFit would, like Matt Fraser, obviously he's like the champion, still reigning champion, and he would advise, he came from a weightlifting background before CrossFit, and I think those sorts of things just really help get involved in the sport. Doesn't mean to say you can't do the sport itself, but have other elements.
Get a bit of a headway, I guess.
That gives you an advantage. definitely.
So just on your back to speak about disability and stuff, that's what you're doing your PhD on, right?
Yes.
Could you tell us a bit about that, speaking on disability, and what have you found along the way?
So it'd be good to just kind of touch a bit on early on, like why I started to do a PhD, I guess, on disability sport. So my PhD is looking at and examining the landscape of sponsorship within elite disability sports, and trying to get a feel of, it's more qualitative, so it's about kind of getting a perspective from the athlete's perspective of how are they experiencing sponsorship within disability sport, and what are some of the benefits to sponsorship for them, and what are some of the disadvantages and some of the negative aspects of it. So really it was early on, it was like kind of post London 2012, and I kind of started to see the Paralympic sport in a new light, because it had better promotion. We had a really good vibe around London, and there was the broadcasting the coverage was greater. So I remember watching it and thinking, I really want to kind of look at that a little bit more. And I'm really interested in, I guess, the range of disabled sports and athletes and the stories that they had to tell. And I kind of found myself wanting to investigate that topic further. So that's when an opportunity came up at Leeds Beckett University, and I took that for a PhD around Paralympics. Well, it's not necessarily Paralympic specific, but it's elite disability sport. So essentially I wanted to kind of link those two studies together, because I'd already had an interest and a background in sport business and sport management, because that was what my undergrad and master's was in. So I wanted to try and link that with disability sport. So that was where the idea of the PhD topic came from, was to look at the sponsorship decision-making processes that happen within elite disability sport. And kind of, I guess, some of the things that I found really along the way, I guess from my research up to date, are that disabled athletes really need to be at the top of their performance in the sport that they're participating in, whatever that might be. So they must be like kind of directly winning medals. Whereas you've got other athletes that are non-disabled, let's say, for instance, Osaka, she's doing incredible things in terms of racial justice and other human rights campaigns, but she's not necessarily kind of winning every match. She's obviously earning more sponsorship money than Serena Williams. But so they're not necessarily at the top, necessarily winning every single match or winning every tournament. And whereas what we found in the research, that disabled athletes, they really need to be successful. So successful being the most important part, and if they don't have that, then they're probably a lot less likely to achieve getting any sort of financial recognition in the form of sponsorship, because it might be that we think sponsors are not recognizing them as valuable properties or able to promote things as well if they're not being recognized like at the top of their game. So we're just noticing there's a little bit of a shift there. A couple of other things really, and from the initial kind of results, would be some athletes that kind of talk about how they don't get asked to participate in activation opportunities, which is really interesting, because if you've got an athlete who's at the top of their game, who are not being asked to do any activation activities and are just given money, like a financial backing, let's say, and they're not expected to then go away and kind of leverage any of the sponsor benefits or anything like that. They're not involved in any fan engagement activities. And that's recorded occasionally within the research as well. So that's quite interesting, where you'd normally get with any non-disabled kind of high performing athlete, there is not a chance that a sponsor would not kind of want to not want to take them forward in terms of creating some sort of activation opportunities.
So what would be activation? What sort of thing is?
Yeah, we talked about like, Samsung do those, they did that before the Paralympic Games, like activate athletes. They would do that with, I guess, with like a Paralympic or an Olympic event, where they might like sell their phones and feature the phones and have like comedians in joining the athletes, taking part in the activities, those sorts of things. So just basically raising the profile of the athlete and the sponsor together. So it's like a combined activity that they would do. And I guess, as I say, with kind of non-disabled, you'd never expect that to be the case, where they would be involved in kind of, as the sponsor would use them as much as they possibly could to get their kind of name, their face associated with their sport, their product that they're selling, or their product or their service that the sponsor's selling at that time. And that's where I think it's very different in terms of that. Not saying that, a large proportion of the athletes kind of are being used in activation opportunities. Like some athletes provided with, like if they're sponsored by a car manufacturer, they're given like cars and they're asked to do some level of promotion via social media, like an advertisement via social media. That's kind of like activation activity as well. Not saying that they don't do that a lot, but it's often, it's sometimes the case, whereas the sponsor or the sponsor doesn't follow up as much with that, and won't kind of like, we talk about return on investment, return on objectives. They don't necessarily record that return on investment as much as they would with the non-disabled athletes. There's a little bit of differences in terms of like how they evaluate the sponsorship. So we've noticed that as well within the research. And then kind of that is overridden really with this whole idea of that the funding that they get. So funding for sponsorship activities usually comes from kind of a CSR budget, not for marketing for disabled athletes, whereas for non-disabled, it would come out of their marketing budgets. Traditionally, your funding for sponsorship does come from a marketing budget, but what we're noticing with these disabled athletes is that it's actually the other way around. It's coming from a CSR budget, which obviously has a lot less money involved. So they can't offer the same amount of financial investment to the athlete than they would if it was a non-disabled athlete. So, and again, they're looking for the similar characteristics. They want sponsors, sponsors want athletes who kind of look good on camera, and a whole host of reasons behind that in terms of like how society views disabled people, things like that, who, can you tell that they are disabled in that way? So these are some of the, I guess, some of the things that the research has drawn out, but it's not to say this is a representative sample of everyone. It's just the sample that I guess I found, and they want to see people who are disabled, because then they can say, we support a disabled athlete. If an athlete doesn't look disabled, some of them sometimes find it difficult to gain sponsorship, because the messages are more difficult to receive. Difficult to receive by public audiences, and sponsors want clarity.
It's a whole lot of different problems, I guess, that you would come across.
There's a lot. That's just the surface, obviously. They're just some of the key themes really that have come out, and will be explored kind of further later on in my research. But they're just kind of the interesting ones that kind of stand out, and hopefully going forward it'll help create, just some more knowledge to sponsors as well, because I think a lot of it is, people that work in sponsorship and who don't have direct contact with disabled athletes just don't necessarily know how to to market them as efficiently, you know. And I think if you'd ask some sponsors, they would agree with that.
Do you think a lot of
But
it's to do with awareness as well? Like, because you mentioned things like not using athletes that don't look necessarily like they've got a disability. But obviously, I guess people and sponsors as well would need to understand that it's not just physical things, or it's not just, you know, there's a wide spectrum of
yes,
disability sport. And
yeah,
I
I
think
think a lot
when
of
people
the
get more aware of it, they'll
mm,
understand it a bit better.
I think, yeah, I think you're right. With a lot of it is a lack of awareness from both public, society, or different perceptions about what disability is to them,
Mm.
and also, yeah, from a business perspective, from sponsorship, because it is relatively new. It's becoming a lot better. We are noticing there are, you know, some of the positives. You know, we're noticing a lot more athletes are being sponsored. We're noticing a lot more sports are being sponsored. We're noticing that companies are now having to create an integrated CSR strategy, you know, and because of that, I guess it's kind of created a bit more hype around disabled athletes. So there's definitely positives, and the more and more coverage we seem to be getting each year from the Paralympics as well as helping, and Channel 4 and the sponsorships that they're doing with Allianz.
Yeah.
So all those things are really helping that sort of change awareness. But you are right in terms of the differences between the visible disabilities and invisible disabilities. They're still challenging. And yeah, they're still challenging in their own rights, really.
Definitely. So do you think you can see disability sport kind of being on par with all the able-bodied sports that we see now, or is it kind of a bit of a mountain to climb?
Yeah, I think it's a really difficult question to answer, but
Yeah, of course.
I think that it's definitely, as I say, as a disabled community, I mean, a larger proportion of disabled athletes would still say it's very unequal if we're representing their voices. Some would say it's getting a lot better in some sports, in particular like triathlon, because there's multiple events within one. Tennis is also doing well because it's had some better forms of coverage over the last couple of years. Athletics have always done well, again, due to kind of more, it's all about how much coverage each sport gets.
Yeah, definitely.
Yeah, so, you know, some, depending on which athlete you've asked in which sport, but it's definitely improving, and it has improved. It's just making sure it's doing it in a way that is right by the athlete, and disability as a whole, and that's something that's quite a sensitive, you know, rightly so, but you know, a sensitive kind of issue to contend with.
Well, hopefully it can keep building, and I guess it'll be sport by
Yes,
sport rather
hopefully.
than as a whole.
Yeah, hopefully it'll just naturally, within this, if the sports become better, hopefully that'll just improve awareness in generally about disabled people and their experiences in sport, and more generally. Yeah
Definitely. Just quickly go back to you and being a lecturer and a university lecturer. I've spoken to a few teachers and stuff on the podcast, but not a university lecturer. So how did you end up getting into that, and was there any other interests that you had?
Yeah, so after my undergraduate, I wanted to study a master's degree, and I was offered some teaching hours during my master's. And I think that was the pinnacle moment for me, where I decided that I wanted to become a lecturer, not necessarily a teacher. So I was kind of torn between kind of going into like primary school teaching, or kind of adult based kind of higher education learning, really. So
Ends of
I
the
was offered
spectrum.
I was offered some teaching hours at the university that I went to at UCLan in Preston, and that I was very fortunate to get those. Kind of just dealt mainly with seminars with the odd lecture thrown in there, and it just gave me kind of I was always quite good at presentations at uni. I always quite enjoyed them, and you know, I've always been quite like kind of driven in that way. So I think just getting that experience and then matching my kind of personality, it just seemed really kind of fluid and quite yeah. And then it kind of stemmed from there, really. But once I did that, then I did manage to get a job at Manchester College, and that was working in the HE sector. So although it was a college, it was they offered like HND programs at the other universities at the time. So the students would do 2 years with us and then 1 year at the university as the final year. And you know, that was just a really good experience. I was there for 5 years. You know, worked well with the sports teams and things like that. And there was no real necessary any sports specific, but it was just sports management based opportunities
Right.
there. And then obviously I got that job, the job at Leeds Beckett University with a PhD, and I
Yeah.
started as a graduate teaching assistant, and that was to do PhD most of the time, and then one day teaching a week. So that kind of eased me in really nicely for the first year, I think it was. And then after that, they offered me a kind of a fixed term year by year contract of full-time teaching, and PhD was part-time, and I just really liked the balance of that and the lifestyle, but also it made me feel like I was part of the team a bit more. So that's kind of how I got into it. Always having a sporting background, I always knew I wanted to do something with sport, and then just because I became more specific in my disciplines that I was studying at uni, because I did sports studies at undergrad and then sports management at masters, it kind of just fell into place quite naturally. So
And
yeah, that was
is
really,
it something you can see yourself staying in, or do
yeah,
you
I
feel
would
like you
like
would want to move on?
I'd like to stay in it, but I'd also like to get the balance right between publishing, research, and also working in industry, because I'm still managing to work in industry at the moment, and it's just about balancing the amount of hours that you can do. So with university jobs, they're obviously quite flexible in terms of course, you want the reputation of the university to kind of travel. So also doing some industry-based work is really important, not just for the brand of the university, but for the students as well, and like trying to bring it into your teaching. I think it's a win-win, and it's good for you as well to actually see what's going on in industry.
Yeah.
So I'd always like to keep that up, and whatever kind of consultancy role that might be, with the rugby league, or going forward, maybe working with sponsors to try and create better sort of strategies for targeting disabled athletes, and I guess maybe activation opportunities they could offer disabled athletes, maybe working along that side as a consultant would be something I would like to do going forward in the future, once I've got my PhD done, eventually, hopefully in the next sort of year and a half, and then I can concentrate, I guess, on using that research for a bit of impact rather than just creating a PhD and then kind of not really reporting anything afterwards. So yeah, that would be for me the next opportunity that I go for.
Okay. So obviously, you played a lot of sport, like you mentioned earlier. Just generally speaking, what sort of difficulties have you faced, like through sport, whether it's playing, coaching, lecturing, or what sort of difficulties have you faced?
With sport, I'd say probably the pressure of going back to being young and performing. I think that was huge anxiety, huge pressure, and you feel pressure throughout your life, at multiple points. But I guess it gives you a way to kind of deal with it as you get older, and you get, there's more severe issues that you have to deal with, like with research. I'd say the hardest thing is taking a break after doing a master's, going into working in teaching, and then coming back and doing a research project. I think it was getting my head back into how to write effectively, how to collect data, all those things. I think I was quite apprehensive about. So for anyone thinking of the same thing, really, like, oh, well, I've taken some time out of industry, or thinking about going to do a master's or something like that, just don't worry about that, because it will come naturally. It might take you like a month to kind of get to grips with what's going on. But I definitely found going from it like kind of an industry job to then a research job, the transition of that was quite difficult, settling in, understanding new processes, those sorts of things. And then with this, sport, it's about balancing time. I'm sure you know about that as well. It's like, how do you keep up with your sport life and your academic life, and personal life, really, isn't it? And
That's
it's about
kind of the hardest part, really, is finding the balance, especially when you're not getting paid for it professionally. You kind of have to balance it around everyday life.
You just doing it out of love and things like that. So I think the advice would be on just really understanding your time, and time is the most valuable asset you've got. It really is. So use it wisely, and and try and just do everything that you can. Make sure it's got impact. Make sure it's just got impact, the work that you're doing, along if it's an undergrad or it's a master's. I would just say get that right. Not saying that I've not failed and I've not been there myself as an undergrad, but you know, if you could kind of have your time again and go back and learn from those things that you've been doing. And I guess for me, it'd be like making sure like I could network enough, I could meet enough people, I could, you know, connect, because the more people you know, the better opportunities you're going to have
Definitely.
going forward. And you never know when you meet the people again, you know, in different circumstances. You know, I've been to conferences in America and I'm still keeping in touch with colleagues there. And, you know, there's opportunities in the future to write papers together. So it's about keeping your options open as well, along that. But yeah, I would say those two are the main sort of challenges I've experienced going
Definitely.
into sport and research. Yeah.
So just something I ask all of my guests. I've asked every single one. Would you say that sport defines you?
I probably would have said that before. Now I've got a baby on the way. Sport does not.
There's more to it than that now.
It does not define me now. I think there's other I think sport can define you depending on your priorities. I think sport shaped me, doesn't define who I am. I've got
Definitely.
multiple interests. Yeah. And I think now with a baby, I'm gonna have different priorities, and it's about how I navigate, because sport's a huge part of my life. How do I navigate through, you know, being a parent and also giving myself the time to still play and be part of sport as an industry? I think it will always be in my life, but I think when you're defined by something, it kind of restricts you a little bit. So you've got to try and be open with that.
That's a good
I
way of
guess.
looking at it, definitely.
Yeah.
I think a lot of, because I feel like with sport, it kind of can, like a lot of my guests have said similar things, that it can take you down kind of any path you want to go down. Like you can do sport and just be a coach. You can do sport just for the social aspect. You can do sport and be a player. But obviously, like you said, it's at the end of the day, it's not all about sport. There is other things that go with it, especially when you're not playing it. You know, you're not an athlete or a coach or whatever at the top level. You've got many other things you have to think about.
Yeah. It's quite a philosophical question, isn't it, to kind of answer, really? Yeah. Like what defines anyone? That's really interesting, and it's quite difficult to kind of answer, really. But yeah, I would say it doesn't necessarily define me, but it's a strong involvement in my life, and it's definitely shaped who I am today. And I absolutely love sports, so of course.
Thank you very much. Well, thank you very much
No worries.
for coming on. I'm sure there'll be a lot of people listening that will take a lot from what you said. Thank you for coming on, and everyone, thank you for listening. Keep an eye on our Twitter and our Instagram page. There'll be more updates for what's coming. Thank you, Vicky, for coming on.
No worries. Thank you. Nice to speak to you.
And you.
Bye.
Bye-bye.